Rarely is there anything more satisfying than a story that makes you feel something in your heart. From a book, a show, a video game, or whatever else. Stories always have a message ascribed to them, no matter how mundane or nonsensical. Messaging is what makes every story worth telling when a story is done and dusted. It's something for the audience to take away. How a story goes about this monumental task is hard to describe because simply nailing down a core message or theme can be explained in a multitude of ways. The world, the characters, the culture, all of these things can lead to these aspects being explained. Then there's the matter of establishing a foundation to take off from, being complex in a delivery, or just throwing your audience off the roof with your material. So how do you strike a balance? How do you sit down and seamlessly interweave all of what needs to be said from these aspects into a form digestible and connective with your audience? Well, seamlessly is a complete lie, but Final Fantasy X does the best it can, making these three aspects work well with one another, especially when communicated through its characters. Final Fantasy X is a game that captures my heart from introduction to ending, balancing its lighter moments with an undercurrent of pessimism and darker tone that is undercut by a large sense of bright optimism. A world born of dreams, flirting with the past until the reality of this world comes to bite, and every moment, no matter how bittersweet, must come to pass. This game is about a dream, but more importantly, it is one where a dream must come to an end. This is Final Fantasy X, a dream gone by. Opening with Zanarkand was a brilliant choice of introduction. Its initial design hits you as a civilization placed some time into the future. Large, regal buildings are seen far off into the distance and illuminated by modern-day technology, almost as if Roman and Greek architects had an inspiration bomb with current technology at their fingertips. Waterfalls adorn Zanarkand's scenery to connect both nature and industrialization quite well. Its scale is visualized through its opening cinematic, showing our key players a world in motion and its impending doom. It does exactly what it needs to do. It sets up a mystery of both what attacked Zanarkand, Auron, and contextualizes Tidus's speech before the title screen. Speaking of which, the title screen gives you an expectation that Tidus is some chosen one, albeit true for what he was chosen for is cruel and beyond his own comprehension, which is why this opening cinematic and that speech together really make you feel as lost as Tidus is. This forces the main character and the audience to be equal in their confusion and rely on what comes next to start to understand the situation, which leads us to the aftermath. Awakening in Baj Temple, a bleak, dark atmosphere contrasts Zanarkand completely to show that Tidus is no longer where he once was. This place is lost to the waters of the ocean and infested with dangerous monsters. This dichotomy is soon complemented by his meeting with Riku alongside Waka. These two cement a clear difference from what Zanarkand was in our eyes for the brief moment we got to see it. Zanarkand appears as a united society without any sort of split between its peoples. However, now these two introduce two cultural outlooks where one believes the other is inherently wrong. The Albed do not wish to sacrifice summoners for Spear's greater good, while believers of Yevon refuse to allow any sort of machina to be used. It creates a point of interest within the characters and the ultimate end for a lot of the characters in this story. If sin is not defeated by the final Aeon, people will die, and if it is used, two people will be lost. Furthermore, the difference in culture and values start to fill out Final Fantasy X's journey alongside its core cast of characters proper, each one portraying themes, culture, or granting deeper understanding of Final Fantasy as a piece of work. So I believe it's only right to begin with the one who acts as our guide for a decent chunk of this story. Let's begin with Lulu. Lulu is a stoic person who hides a deep wound after the loss of her lover Chapu to Sin. It doesn't make up her character wholly, only the relationship she shares with Waka. Her constant anger at him when he talks about Chapu possibly returning makes that very clear. She was hurt by his loss deeply, so any attempts to entertain his sudden return are outright rejected in favor of her stewing in a stagnant state of grief. The design of her character being a long dress with belts covering her legs colored in all black makes her a widow type figure character who's closed off to the rest of the world. She contrasts the bright yellows and oranges of Wakka, Riku, and Tidus, as if she's leaving the openness and playfulness of the group's dynamic to the three of them. The dark color palette highlights her sorrow while enabling a more mature look thanks to her eyeliner and lipstick. This offers a steep contrast to Yuna's whites, blue, yellow, and whitish pink. It gives Yuna the look of a reserved youth. Another point to this fact, depending on how you look at it, is when Lulu shows off her cleavage in her victory animation. It's this contrast between a reserved religious girl on the path to womanhood versus the older, more experienced woman who has been through some things and has confidence in her body. What's more is the irony that comes with her experience and understanding. She failed as a guardian once before in the Cavern of Lost Faith, so who's to say she could actually protect Yuna? She couldn't stop Chappu from using Machina despite it being against Yevon's teachings. Even the way she treats her weapon in the game is like she's holding a child she couldn't have with the man she loved who died, contradicting the teachings that she grew up believing in. These points truly fill out her character and fleshes out her ultimate decision to stand by Yuna near the end of the game. She'd fought alongside her, proving she wouldn't fail, and managed to let go of her grief on her journey because of the people she met. It gives a great amount of closure to her character and fills out what she was meant to be. Someone who's able to overcome her past thanks to the connections she's been making with others. A general overview of Lulu isn't a dreary, matter-of-fact person because she's able to have these smaller interactions with the rest of the cast that expand on her outside of criticizing others, especially Tidus and Yuna. Despite her clear annoyance with Tidus, she still goes out of her way to explain Spear's locations, traditions, and practices even when she isn't asked. The story makes her the lore buff while integrating a unique character trait into that role. It's such blatant expository dialogue that it's called out by Tidus in-universe, making for a funny bit in retrospect. Together, all this makes Lulu a mature, stoic character whose final payoff is someone more than the way she is presented to us. Seeing her as a fanservice character is a shallow description. Seeing her as a woman mourning her lost lover is just a part of her character. Her care for Yuna, Wakka, and Tidus are all moments that contrast these one-dimensional looks of her character, making her truly whole. Wakka's character represents a distinct contrast in comparison to Lulu. His dedication to the teachings of Yevon, hatred for Machina, and wishing for his brother's comeback reveals his wound as a character. The scar left on him by sin is powerful, something he vocalizes and acts on. He blames Machina for Chappu's death, he blames Lulu for recruiting him, and he uses Tidus as a stand-in for a time. He hates the Al Bhed for the Machina failing his brother and being against the teachings of Yevon. He completely disregards their attempts to stop sin and believes that they are the key reason that sin still exists. But even though he hates sin as much as anyone else does for taking everything from him, it's also because of sin that he's given many things as well. His relationship with Tidus could never have been if sin never existed. His hatred of the Al Bhed is eventually overcome because sin forced him to ally with numerous Al Bhed. His journey led to a new sense of self and truth, a breakthrough that came about because he was willing to confront the reality of the events around him. Meeting Yuna and witnessing the corruption of Spear's hierarchy, he's challenged. He's had to face what his beliefs were invested in and ultimately turn them down in favor of cold hard facts and the family he wanted to stand beside. This was the final step in his character arc, and he's been led to this point throughout his time that he spent with everyone else. Tidus offered him brotherhood, Lulu critiqued his wishful thinking, Yuna's determination pushed him forward, Riku's innocence made him confront his prejudice. All of these factors wash over the character of Wakka, and his design communicates these connections too, at least with Riku and Tidus. His clothes show his skin and muscular frame, falling in line with Tidus's design. The sleeve over the left arm in bright yellows represent their connection and communicates position as aces for their respective blitzball team. On the flip side, Wakka and Riku's designs communicate two very different messages. Wakka's sandals and pants feel airy, like he's meant to be by the beach coast, a direct contrast to Riku, who carries a playful industrial look about her. The goggles, smithing glove, and shoes say this much, but her sleeveless shirt and shorts give her a vibe of a youth and unique freedom of a child. Their color palettes are also decently close to one another, but their difference in physiques lend to a mature versus immature design motif, all the while demonstrating how their relationship is supposed to interact as two opposites in almost every way. At the center of their relationship, though, is a divide of worldviews which needed to be broken down in order to completely restructure him. The cherry on top is when he finds finds out Yuna's heritage as a half Albed in reaction to the Albed's home under siege. Here, it's like his prejudice become null and void in any meaningful sense, elaborating his first disbelief but resolution to stand against Yunalesca. She was the final block to break down for Wakka to finally be free of Yevon's teachings and the misinformation it spread, because Wakka decided to stand beside everyone regardless of what he's been taught. He wouldn't abandon anyone in need or his family. Ever. Wakka from a developmental standpoint is by far Final Fantasy X's most interesting approach writing-wise. There is no Wakka is right in what he says about the Albed. The narrative never compliments or reinforces his beliefs as a positive thing, ever. He's the well-meaning, hopeful, ignorant guy who sees the error of his ways thanks to everyone around him and experiencing the truth of the world, culminating in someone who's seen through his harmful ideology to become a genuinely kind person. Rikku is an interesting character. She's the second playable character after Auron, but the last to officially join your party. Her presence as Tidus's initial guide for this new world sets her up as the knowledgeable type, which she definitely is to an extent. Her deep knowledge of Machina demonstrates her intellect while establishing herself as a contradiction to everything Yevon is as a faith system. She constantly goes against its teachings in pursuit of saving Yuna's life. She represents a rejection of the status quo while working inside its twisted game, and this sits at the core of her character. Beneath the silly antics and fear of lightning is what comes of the Albed, and what she says is true. Rikku had lost her home once before. Now she'd lost it twice after her people were given hope by her father Cid. Her loss embodied her confession of what the pilgrimage actually means. By losing everything, she has to admit what comes next, which brings up an ethical or moral question. Does one have to sacrifice themselves for the greater good? The Albed have been stealing away Spira's hopes with no real plan to stop sin completely. Machina, even at its best, can't destroy it. There was never a surefire way for anything to stop sin except for a summoner's sacrifice. It creates a classical moral dilemma, a dilemma as old as time, the trolley problem. Whether you believe in the hero's hope or Yevon's teachings creates an interesting question for players to interact with. Tradition or transformation? Obviously, we will be strung along with whatever the main cast chooses, but it's still an interesting avenue to explore leading up to Final Fantasy X's endgame. Rikku being the one to bring up this question is deliberate because she is as much a guide towards the ideal future as Tidus and Yuna are. While she may not be able to fully explore what is the alternative to the final summoning, she still brings much needed context to the Albed and answers why we should reject Yevon and pursue a different way forward. Kimahri can be forgettable to some, and his relevance to the story can be, well, negligible at times. The central focus of his character, though, is his status as a disgraced Ronso. Prior to Final Fantasy X's beginning, Kimahri is cast out of his tribe after Biron broke his horn, a deep disgrace in Ronso culture. It's reasonable to guess that he was without purpose and lived most of his days alone because of his shame. However, in being given the task to oversee Yuna throughout her childhood into her young adulthood and throughout her pilgrimage, gave him a new sense of purpose, leading him to find a new family, one that doesn't care for who he was but who he is now. By gaining this new family and opening up a bit, there's a vague guess one could make about who Kimahri was prior to losing his horn. It's stated he lost it because he refused to yield in their fight, so one could draw a conclusion that he was probably overconfident in his abilities. Arrogant, maybe. Now his actions speak for him. He tests Tidus for this exact reason. Kimahri needed to know, when push comes to shove, if Tidus could defend himself and Yuna as well. His challenge against Seymour was another example of this. His job is to protect Yuna, so he will face the one who caused her so much emotional turmoil. Naturally though, everyone rushes back to his side because his selfish decision wouldn't push them away. It would only draw them closer so they would be by his side until the very end. This brings us, well, to Mount Gagazet. For everyone, it is the brink of everything. For Kimahri, it's a full circle moment. He stands before his people once more, still disgraced. He faces the Ronso who forced him on this journey. Whatever growth he's undergone is scaled to by Biran and Yenkei, so they are mechanically meant to provide a challenge regardless of Kimahri's growth. A fight representing Kimahri overcoming his past and reclaiming his pride as a Ronso warrior. His horn may be broken, his body may be smaller, but with the help of everyone else beside him, he was able to grow into a Ronso warrior who could take back what was stolen from him all by himself. In the theme of stoic silent warriors, Auron is a representation of the previous generation's failures and the dead end Yevon's teachings lead to. His start in the story through the Jek spheres is jam-packed, with presence throughout Spira, a devout follower of Yevon, Braska's guardian and once fiancé to a priest's daughter, all of which created a character whose fall from grace is apparent by the time of the current game. His uptight, focused personality created an interesting dynamic between him and Jecht. Jecht only cared about returning to Zanarkand, Auron only cared about serving Braska on his pilgrimage, and Braska united all of them as outcasts to society because of their stations currently in Spira. Braska was a clear mediator for their two clashing personalities, but Auron eventually came around as Jecht grew to be more of an adult. As the two grew closer and understood one another, Auron began to soften, to enjoy his time with Braska and Jecht. The journey became humanized, but with the ritual of the final Aeon, Auron's friends are reduced to tools for a false hope. He knew well before Jecht how all of this would go, how the pilgrimage was going to end, yet an outsider in Jecht became what kills grief itself. Auron loses all of his worth as a guardian by that point. He couldn't save either of his closest friends or sacrifice himself to be the final Aeon like he would have been, and he hates that part of himself who failed. In a rare moment of genuine emotion, a scene plays out where he hacks away at his younger self. His faith, his friends, his purpose, all were meaningless except his promise to watch after Yuna and Titus. So, knowing that he had failed, knowing that there is no real second chance for him, he became a calm observer to what they would choose. Through following a path made true by his involvement, he was forced to make a choice. He chose to let them carve their own stories where he failed to create his own. This is the definitive beauty of Auron. He clung to this material world so he could fulfill his promises. Die and be free of pain, or live and fight your sorrow. Auron asks that question of all those around him, something he failed in both regards. He will help these children right the wrongs bestowed unto the world. He's the only unsent in the game who tried for a better future, not reinforcing its corrupted values that turned Spira into an endless spiral. It leaks into his design exceptionally well with his old man motif while hanging on to the same clothes he wore so long ago. A representation of his age in comparison to who he decided to be now. Of all the characters in Final Fantasy X, he is easily my favorite in this story's entirety. Titus had to grow all throughout his journey, not only to understand himself or the woman he would eventually fall in love with, but also his role within this world. Titus interacts with Spira's culture to reject it. By not knowing its culture, he's free from its influence and prejudices from the beginning. He's not being limited by the infallible truths of Yevon's teachings. His development throughout the story and relationship with Yuna reinforce this message perfectly. All he does is dream for a future where he and Yuna can see what comes after her pilgrimage. He's an accurate representation of hope, a stark contrast to his father who conceded to the pilgrimage's inevitable outcome. A concession isn't a right explanation though. Jecht gave his life because he had faith in Braska, who had faith in sin being defeated for good after this summoning. Not to mention Auron's insight being crucial to Yuna's final decision and support to Titus's desire for a better tomorrow. What is worthy of comparison is Jecht's acceptance versus Titus's refusal. Jecht's dream was doomed to fail, for his Zanarkand is a false reality. Titus's dream was feasible because of his existence within reality as a genuine possibility. Sin was eternal so long as Yevon continued to live, and Titus had the proper means of weakening Sin as his armor to get to him through his father. Jack's acceptance was based on a certain truth. Titus's rejection was based on an uncertain future. This is why Titus is the best representation of hope within Final Fantasy X, because what is Final Fantasy X as a story without someone trying to make the impossible possible? His representation as the world's hope directly contrasts the character of Seymour, who is his opposite. He's cunning, smart, and much more powerful on his own. Seymour seeks to free everyone from suffering by merging with Sin and ending all of their lives, whilst Titus decides to struggle to fight his sorrow. They are two sides of Auron's quote, with both deciding the people of Spira's fate for them. There's also the fact of their relationship with Yuna. Titus started as naturally shallow with his interests, but as he grew up more, he started to respect Yuna the way she should be. Seymour never saw her past her usefulness as a summoner and a way to quote-unquote bring hope to Spira. She was never more than a tool for him, where Titus saw her truly as a person who was going through her own story. By the end of Titus's story, he gives everything for Yuna's future, for everyone's tomorrow. Final Fantasy X is literally his story and he knows it. That's why he gets to choose how it ends. That's why he is hope. However, I'd like to think that Yuna is really who Final Fantasy X is meant for, despite me saying all of that. Yuna provides a compliment to Titus. Despite knowing her life from the beginning will come to an end, she never talks about it because it's too hard and because she doesn't want to shut down Titus's optimism. His presence inspires her hopes and dreams, while her presence gives him a presence of mind in Spira. Their initial attraction to each other stems from their dynamic, and it's mainly produced thanks to Yuna's character progression throughout. Yuna is forced to live up to her father's legacy in the aftermath of the Calm. All she has are tales of his greatness and what allows her to take her path free of issue. She's a mark of purity, defining what a summoner should be. Someone who will do all they can to become Spira's hope, all the while winning everyone's respect and attention. A contrast to her father, who wed an Albed, then conceived a child with said Albed. He was an outcast who became a legend, and she was expected to follow suit. Regardless of her lineage as a half-blood Albed, it's almost poetic that she was placed in such a high regard by Spira. Her taking up the summoner role should have been blasphemous by definition. Instead, she is both mocked and respected strictly because she's her father's daughter. It hammers home why she's initially presented as a passive observer in her own life. What else does she have going for her except to be a summoner? This is why the character of Belgemine represents a crucial part of Yuna's story, another unsent who, like Auron, wishes to aid the current generation towards a greater good. Belgemine provides a solo challenge for players and Yuna herself. She's telling us in Yuna that in order to be a great summoner, you cannot simply fulfill your pilgrimage. You must also use the power of the Aeons to their maximum potential. Now, personally, these fights were pretty hard because I rarely use the Aeons outside of force events, mainly using them to tank big attacks on reruns against tougher bosses. This was another point towards Yuna's character though, as it speaks to her relying on her power rather than those of the Guardians. Her connection to Yuna is what creates the strongest version of Yuna. Taking their relationship into account, Yuna's decision to reject the final Aeon feels completely solidified. Belgemine believes summoners are no tools of Yevon, and Yuna agrees with her sentiment. After killing Seymour, Yuna begins to depart from Yevon's teachings to become the true hope Spira needed. Her guardians were there to support her on her pilgrimage. However, her beliefs informed her decision to reject Yevon completely. She steps outside her father's legend to not only live up to his ideals, but build on them and transcend them in her own way. It's all topped off by some poetic irony as Yunalesca is rejected by the summoner who has her namesake. It just makes her decision to move beyond the faith she followed that much more influential, and demonstrates that Yuna is no one's fool no matter what she may believe. This all culminates well with her design as she takes on that reserved religious girl aesthetic very well. Her clothing, I've read, is called a hakama, a furry sode and a kimono, but the long sleeves and coverage of her body illustrates her youthful appearance to complement the reservedness of her character well. The white, blue, pink, and yellow of her outfit make for a welcoming color scheme that connects her with the rest of the cast exceptionally well. Again, she contrasts Lulu while complimenting everyone else to show their design connections extremely well. If Auron is my favorite character in this game, then Yuna is easily the most well-written, bar none. Sin provides a thematic outline and goal to strive for. It's a product of the people's ignorance, turning such ignorance into the greatest sin of man in Spira. Because they do not understand that Yevon's existence is the cause of all Spira's sorrow, they are bound to this endless cycle of brief calms. By gaining Gnosis, they can gain true freedom from the cycle Sin created. There's also a bit of cruel irony, as Sin is the product of man quite literally, as Yevon was once a man, and the final Aeon becomes Yevon's new set of armor, which are created from summoners and their most trusted guardian. I believe Sin's design as a fish-like eldritch abomination lends credence to the depiction of what human sin could actually be perceived as, the base origin of man from the sea, their very birth, and not an unseen, unknowable force like a god. Furthermore, its alien design isn't anything you can graft onto a single comparable look from any other work ever, but it isn't iconic in the conventional sense like any number of movie monsters. Sin is uniquely its own thing, and the irony of human connection to who becomes Sin being the crux of the creature's existence is my favorite reveal, all the while offering a reduction of Jekk's character with or without seeing the Jekk spheres. His role as Sin feels fitting. In doing some research about Jekk's character, there seemed to be a general consensus. Jekk wasn't a great father or husband, but he did become a great man. He went from a character meant to be despised from Tidus's outlook to someone we needed to know in order to understand him. This is exactly why he's able to meet everyone in his human form first before the fight. The Jekk spheres give him a lot more context, definitely, but the base story tells enough through Tidus's loss of animosity and Auron's accounts of his character during their journey. In becoming Sin, he completed his story because he gave all he had for the good of others, despite his desire to see his family again. A selfless sacrifice is what his story amounted to because he'd lost any hope of making his dream come true. That's the truth. Like Braska, there was only one way for this to go, and Jekk knew that. All the major antagonists of Final Fantasy X represent a loyalty to tradition and maintaining a form of the status quo. Yuna continues the practice of the final summoning to instill a false hope in Spira. Seymour, despite his madness, wanted to use Sin to end the cycle of suffering permanently by ending everyone's lives, something that Sin itself was going to do with or without his involvement. Then there is Yevon, whose existence continues the traditions of Spira because he lost his identity and protection of what he loved. A character, or rather an entity, who brings into focus the role of Gnosticism in the development of Final Fantasy X's world. Just as a brief disclaimer, I am not a studied person on the history or inner workings of Gnosticism. This will mainly serve as a general overview, if that, into what Gnosticism is, so if you're interested, I'll be leaving a link to where I got my information from in the description. With that out of the way, Gnosticism is the name given to a loosely organized religious and philosophical movement that flourished in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. The main ideas I'll be focusing on from this religious movement are the Gnosis, the Greek word for knowledge or insight, Demiurge, the semi-divine being who created the material world, and Aeons, inhabitants of the Pleroma, the realm from which the world originates. To continue off from Yevon, I believe he is the Demiurge of Final Fantasy X. In Gnosticism, Demiurge is the creator of not only the material world, but believes itself the only god in all of creation or existence, and hubristically declares itself the only existing god. This relates to Yevon in two ways, with one relation existing because of Spira's people. Yevon has the power to create Sin, an indestructible creature that is meant to punish the people of Spira for their sins. However, it only exists because Yevon's existence makes it so. It, like Demiurge, is by definition a false god, because sin can be overcome, and so too can Yevon, because they are not the One. The One, or the Father, transcends all things and has no equal or peers, for it has always been. A clear contradiction to Yevon itself because he is defeated by our main party. Furthermore, Yevon creates the material world and circle of suffering in Spira. What's key to understand is that only through gaining Gnosis, or divine knowledge of how this world became what it is, Yuna, Auron, and everyone else are able to find a way to break this false practice, a knowledge she gains from the false messiah who is a messenger for a false god. The parallels of Yevon and Yunalesca as a father-daughter pairing to God and Jesus in Orthodox Christianity is pretty frightening as well. I mean this only in the way that it looks, as Yunalesca is effectively a messenger for Yevon. That is the only comparison here, not remotely saying that they are directly comparable in actions, values, or origin, just to be clear. Furthermore, Aeons in-game get their names from Aeons in Gnosticism, Aeons being inhabitants of Pleroma, which acts as a heaven in Gnostic belief. Interestingly, the Aeons are made of Fayth, who reside in the far plane. By possibly taking inspiration from religious concepts, really fleshes out Yevon's teachings on a deeper level. I'd like to thank again one of my loyal subscribers for recommending that I take a look into this. It was really a damn good time. Each environment in this game tells their own stories. Besaid is an island front meant to be welcoming, but as the story continues, the environments become more muted in color. There's more bricks, or the remains of something lost to time. Guadosalam is another standout amongst these because it contrasts Besaid's feel so well. It's a closed-off cave-like system that entraps our cast into one singular path. The overgrowth of Earth lends to the designs of the Guado people and how close to the natural path Seymour is pushing Yuna. Zanarkand is much the same with some key differences. Unlike Besaid, it represents the end, the dead. Unlike Guadosalam, it is an open space with pale colors only darkened by the night of the dome. Furthermore, this is where Yuna's future begins and the past that Titus is willing to leave behind in favor of the place that he lives now. Each of these environments are exceptionally detailed. You can find a unique quality of each and every single one in this game. Each one is an honest masterpiece. The same statement applies to its music, which I've used in several of my videos, and this one obviously. All of the tracks hit the message they are trying to communicate. To Zanarkand is a key example of this, as it is a bittersweet piece meant to be both nostalgic and filled with sorrow because of what was lost and gained throughout the party's journey to get here. Underwater Remains serves as the perfect underwater theme because of its eerie yet curious feel to it. Honestly, all the tracks are peak anyways. This game is definitely the most fun I've had with a turn-based RPG. Combat being dictated by stats gives emphasis on improving each character instead of just relying on an assured moment to counter. This system goes hand in hand with the grid system, which forgoes traditional leveling in favor of a customizable build for any of your characters. Granted, grinding to make someone like Yuna into a physical tank and a cannonball constantly moving at Mach 20 is a lot of work, but you can still do it, which is one of my favorite things about this system. Anyone can be customized to be anything if you're willing to put the time into it. However, you can still go about the traditional route by leaving everyone on their designated path for a more streamlined and easy playthrough. That's what I did. Unfortunately, if you want to see everything Final Fantasy X has to offer, you'll have to max out every character's stats to take on some of the most grindiest super bosses ever. I haven't beat all the super bosses. I've faced a handful of the Dark Aeons. I don't have too much time to grind all characters to max and press the A button until I have Carpal Tunnel. I think that the Dark Aeons and any other super bosses are cool novelties, a reward for not only completing the game, but how a player's grind can be rewarded. Still, from my experience, playing through even the weaker Aeons is a slog to get through, so it just isn't for me. Also, trying to get all the celestial weapons is such a drag. 200 Thunderbolts, not doing it, and the Chocobo minigame is literally the bane of my existence. Also, I can't collect anima to get Yuna's, so my whole main trio was just Riku with God Hand, Attack Real Auroch, Waka, and Masamune Auron. It wasn't the best team, but it certainly was a team. At the very beginning, I talked about striking a balance. While I didn't go too much in depth on the story itself, I found a nice middle ground by talking about and analyzing these characters within the context of it. The ending of Final Fantasy X is one of my favorites in gaming, and had it not been for the post-credit scene with Titus returning, it would be my favorite story regardless of medium. The finale of Final Fantasy X is about letting go of the past and moving on completely. Braska, Jecht, and Auron let go of their futures for the sake of a false hope. Yuna, Kamari, Lulu, Riku, and Waka were going to surrender their lives to it as well until a dream came true. Titus may have been a dream all along, but he was real just like the hope for Spira to be free of sin was. At the core of this game is that philosophy. Letting go is not the end unless you let it be so. There will always be a dream worth dreaming of or a life worth living if you're willing to live it. Yuna's final words make up that message completely in my eyes. It's a lesson I carry with me to this day and one worth its weight in gold. I wish I could sit down and analyze every last nook and cranny of this game in excruciating detail, but I do need to keep some sort of upload schedule for the coming months if I want to hit 10K. All I can say is if I didn't go into too much depth of your favorite part of this game, I am deeply sorry, but also incredibly thankful that you decided to watch this video to the very end. I couldn't be more grateful to have the space and time to make an essay like this and have viewers like yourself. I hope you'll stick around for more. I don't have a big conclusion for this video except for this one message, so I'll end it like I always do. Thank you so much for watching. Please stay safe out there and have yourselves a damn good one. I'll see you all next time. Later.
The people and the friends that we have lost. No dreams that are faded. Never forget them.